welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today we are revisiting my Read or Rid project for 2021. So 2021 was the first year that I did this project, so I selected what I thought was 24 books, but was actually 25 books off of my shelves that had been sitting there for a really long time, or were ones that I had purchased and was just like, am I actually interested in reading these books? I don't know if I am. And so I gave myself a year to read those books, and if I did not read them, then I had to get rid of them by the end of the year. I did a mid-year check-in for how I was doing, so I will link both my original TBR video and also that mid-year check-in as well, so that way you can check both of those out, because I'm only really going to be talking about the books that I read for the second half of 2021. Actually, I kind of lied, because I think that my video came out in August, because as I'm looking at my list, there was a book I did read in August and I'm pretty sure I talked about there. So I'm actually picking up in September. So I had a couple books that I read for September for my Read or Rid project. The first of those was Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. Sandy from Us Reads a Lot was doing a read along of this for her 1001 book club, and so that was kind of the push I needed to pick this up. I actually DNF'd this book. I really did not like it in a lot of ways. So I was reading, I think I read the first chapter or two chapters. The chapters are really long, so I ended up about 40 or 50 pages in, and I was not enjoying the writing style all that much, and I found it to be like it felt very agenda driven. Like, I realized that authors try to make a point about books, and that's fine, but when I feel like I'm being hammered over the head with it, I feel like the author doesn't think that their readers have a brain. So that was one element. Another element that I really hated about this book is that it was very sexualized in weird ways. The main character, he is from one planet and he's coming to Earth, I think, and he talks about how everything on Earth basically arouses him, because like the furnitures have curves and that's so arousing, and taking a shower is arousing, and the bed is so soft that it's arousing. And I'm like, okay. So then I ended up checking some things about this book. I was looking at some reviews, trying to decide if I wanted to continue or not. And oftentimes I do check content warnings, and I did not check content warnings for this book for whatever reason. And so I'm glad I looked at those reviews, because I found out that there's actually some detailed sexual assault in this book, which is something that I absolutely steer away from as much as I possibly can. So I DNF'd this one, and I'm not at all sad that I did. I did not DNF The School for Good and Evil, and in some ways I wish I had. So this book had everything going for it for me. It has the whole magical school trope, and it's very fairy tale-esque and pulls from a lot of fairy tales, and that was super fun. It's about these two girls who get taken from their village to go to the School for Good and Evil. Someone comes and takes two children away every 4 years. There's one girl, this girl here, who thinks she's perfect and needs to be a princess. She gets sent to the School for Evil, and this girl who everyone accuses of being witchy goes to the School for Good, so they think that there's a mistake. And so I really enjoyed this book a lot, but I felt like as the book went on, there was really no character development, and I felt like the friendship between the main two characters was extremely toxic and codependent. And then the ending happened, and I was like, why? Why? So I ended up really hating this book in the end, which is really a shame. Next up, I read Reckless by Cornelia Funke. This book had been on my shelf for years and years and years. I had found it at a thrift store. I love Cornelia Funke. Inkheart is one of my favorite middle grade trilogies of all time, and I love it with all my heart, and it's one of those ones that maybe it's because it's a translated work, but it should have reached the popularity of Harry Potter, in my personal opinion, and I think that it's a travesty that it didn't. Anyways, I digress. Reckless is the first in a trilogy that she wrote. It's a YA trilogy, not a middle grade, and it's about this boy who discovers that he can go through this mirror in his father's office, and it's a totally different world. I think it's actually called the mirror world. And this book also has a lot of fairy tale elements, which is really, really interesting, and I wasn't expecting going into it. However, this book is not well written, unfortunately. The characters are not well fleshed out. I did not care what happened to any of them. I did not care about the romances that were starting to develop. I just didn't care. And there was a lot of plot points that didn't make sense, which is really, really unfortunate. I just feel like this book had potential and it didn't reach any of it. Next up, we have another DNF, and that's Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. This is the first in a YA fantasy trilogy, I think. And I just wasn't feeling it, to be honest. I tried reading this and got about 100 pages in, and it just felt very formulaic. It felt like every YA fantasy I had ever read, but with more sexual content. The main character basically comes of an age where she is able to reign, and so she's been kept in seclusion this whole time, and now she is in a position to come in and become queen of this area. And I just felt like her personality was just like every other YA protagonist, every other girl that's not like other girls and is strong-willed and all that kind of stuff. So it just didn't work for me. Then I have 2 books for my Read or Read project that I put on my TBR for December, and I did finish both of them. So the first one of those is The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This will be in my December wrap-up, so I don't really want to go too far into details in this, but it's basically about these 2 families. So one family owns this piece of land and this house, and this other patriarch of another family decides that he wants it. And when he can't buy it from the other person because no price is good enough, he decides he is going to accuse that man of witchcraft and get him killed so he can take his land. So then there's this supposed like curse on the family where the man has done this. And so we're following this family, both of these families, a few generations later. And this book had some interesting things about it, which I think is the only reason why I didn't DNF it. But it ended up being super disappointing for me, unfortunately. And then the last book that I completed for my Read or Read project this year is To Stay Alive by Skila Brown. This is a YA free verse novel about the Donner Party. And I had pretty low expectations going into this. Admittedly, I bought it at a library discard sale because the cover was really pretty. That was a huge reason why. And I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting premise. I really liked this book. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. So this is one that I am keeping. And so far out of the books I mentioned that I read, this is the only one that I am keeping, which is kind of sad. Then I did a try a chapter vlog for the 5 books on my list that were remaining that I wanted to try. I had one that I didn't, and I'm just getting rid of, and I'll just mention The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I had this on a TBR at some point, and I just don't like it. I've tried to read this book like 5 times, and it's so short, and I just really don't like it. And I'm like, why am I trying to convince myself to read this when this is on my Read or Read project? I'm just getting rid of it. So I didn't even pick this one up at all. But I did pick up the other 5, and I did try at least a chapter from each of them. So those books were The Frog Princess by E.D. Baker, which I read the first chapter of and thought it was really charming and funny. So I am holding on to this one to try again at a later date. And then the rest of them I actually decided to get rid of. So I'd rather be reading by Anne Bogle. I read the first 2 chapters of this and just wasn't really a fan. It's a nonfiction, and it's just about the reader's life, and I just didn't really like her writing style. I found it really repetitive, and just, I don't know. I'm not gonna pick it up again. I've had it for like 6 years or something crazy like that. I just need to get rid of it. And I also had Tears of the Giraffe by Alexander McCall Smith. This book was not bad. I thought it was funny, the first chapter, and kind of enjoyed it, but it's not one that I'm really super motivated to pick up. I have the first 8 books in the series on my shelf, and guess what? So does the library. And this is not a book that even when I do read it, that I would be interested in rereading. So I'm just gonna get rid of the whole series, and it's gonna put so much more room on my shelf. I also tried the first chapter of White Fang by Jack London, and I talked in that video about how much I hated The Call of the Wild and was wondering if White Fang was going to be any better in terms of the brutality and in terms of the ending. And most of you told me that it was similar to Call of the Wild. I did have one person, my friend Joanna, told me that she felt like it had a more happy ending. But I don't know. I love Jack London's writing, but I feel like I probably don't want to own this book. So I'm going to unhaul it at some point. Maybe I will read White Fang, but it is a classic and it's one that I am certain that my library has on its shelves. And the last book in that triad chapter was The Zookeeper's Wife by Diane Ackerman. And I just am not super interested in this. And I wish that I was, because it sounds like an interesting premise and it's a nonfiction, like it's really happened. These people in Poland who had a zoo and then they ended up hiding Jews there during World War II. And so it sounds so fascinating, but I just don't really want to be reading it, unfortunately. So I'm getting rid of this one as well. Okay, so to review from my year as a whole for my Read to Read project, like I mentioned, there are 25 books on this list, and I at least tried all of them except The Turn of the Screw. So I gave them all a pretty fair chance. And unfortunately, I am getting rid of 20 of the 25. So I say unfortunately, but actually that actually frees up so much room on my shelves, because that's a lot of books. And then if you count that there's 7 more books from the #1 Ladies Detective Agency that I'm getting rid of, that's 27 books off my shelf. So I guess that this challenge definitely had its purposes, but I am going to share with you really briefly the 5 books that I am keeping. 2 of them are actually kind of DNFs that I'm interested in trying again. So the first one I mentioned in my first video earlier this year, and that's The Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I didn't get very far into it and I was kind of like bored by it. I kept falling asleep. I did not reach the point that many people told me, once you hit this point where this character enters into the story, it becomes much more interesting. I did not hit that point. So I am still actually really intrigued by it though, and I want to give it another try. So I did decide to hang on to this one. And then also, like I mentioned, Frog Princess. I only read the first chapter, but I thought it was super fun and I really do want to read this one. So that leaves me with 3 books out of 25 books that I completed and actually enjoyed. So those 3 books are, first of all, To Stay Alive by Skilla Brown, which I mentioned. I'm going to hang on to this one. I really enjoyed it. And I also read Gregor the Overlander by Suzanne Collins, which is a series I've never heard anybody talk about. And Suzanne Collins also wrote The Hunger Games, and she wrote this series before she wrote The Hunger Games. The series has 5 books in it. It's about a boy who kind of like falls through this vent in his New York City apartment laundry room with his toddler sister. And they end up in this world. That's why it's called the Overlander, because it's like the underland world that's underneath New York City. And it is just like a really fun middle grade. I really enjoyed it so much. And I do plan to continue on with the series, and I own the rest of the books now. And the book that I think I liked the most out of all these books, that was the most surprising, possibly the most surprising book I read all this year, because I went into it with the expectation that I wasn't gonna like it, and was even questioning, why did I even buy this book? I had heard like one booktuber talk about it and loved it, and I was like, oh, I saw it at a library book sale and it was a library discard, so I'm like, oh, I'll pick it up because my library is not going to carry it anymore. The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. You guys, I love this book so much. This kind of kicked off my fantasy reading, because I read this book, I think I started it in May, and it kicked off me starting like 5 different adult fantasy series, and it made me like just want to read more fantasy. And I was really surprised, because this book, not only is it a really, for me, kind of like slow-paced starting fantasy series, but also there's a lot of content that is not something I would typically read. Like there's a lot of like brutal violence in certain parts of it. There's a lot of language in it as well. And those are things that I don't necessarily always read books that have that kind of stuff in it. So I would steer you away from this book if those are things that bother you. But the found family in this book is so heartwarming and so wonderful. And I found myself incredibly fascinated by Scott Lynch's world and the politics that are happening in it. And it's very interesting. It reminds me kind of a little bit of like Oliver Twist, but make it fantasy, make Oliver an adult, and make it darker. So there you have it. That's my Reader Rid project for 2021. I feel like this was a really great project for me, even though unfortunately a lot of the books that I chose were duds. At least they're ones that I can now move off my shelf. And so I'm really, really happy about that. I am hoping that maybe I have a little bit more success in 2023 in terms of actually like enjoying a few more of the books that I selected. But even so, even if I don't enjoy them, at least I'm making room for books that I actually will enjoy. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you read any of these books, and if so, were your thoughts different than mine, the same as mine? And also, what is your process for getting through your physical TBR? If you have a lot of books that are unread on your shelf, do you have some sort of system to get through them? Because my Reader Rid project for this year was the first time that I have had any sort of system to work through, and I felt like it really did help me a lot. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.